Under a torrential downpour that seemed to announce what was coming, I arrived at the event hall. The raindrops crashed against my face like little betrayals while I firmly held the gift I had chosen, with so much love for the wedding of my only daughter, Sarah. It was an antique silver tea set that had belonged to my grandmother pieces I had kept safe for 40 years, waiting for the perfect moment to pass them on. My navy blue dress, chosen with such excitement to see my little girl become a wife, was completely soaked. My gray hair stuck to my forehead as I tried to protect the gift box under my shawl. It was just as I crossed the threshold of the banquet hall that I heard a phrase so cruel and heartless that it made me shake to my bones. It was something I never imagined hearing in my entire life, and my only reaction was to do something unthinkable, something that would change our lives forever. For months, Sarah had kept me involved in every detail of the preparations. She consulted me about the flowers for the altar, the flavor of the cake, the color scheme, the music for the ceremony. Or at least, that's what I thought. I thought my opinion mattered, that my experience as a woman married for 35 years had value to her. How wrong I was. In the last few weeks, I had noticed something strange in her behavior. She answered my calls in a rush, avoided my gaze when we talked, and acted nervous every time I mentioned any detail about the wedding. I attributed this change to the natural nerves of a bride-to-be. As a mother, I understood that pre-wedding stress can make girls act strangely. I never imagined there was something much more painful behind that attitude. I stopped under the awning at the entrance, shaking the rain off my wet shawl when I heard my daughter's voice drifting from the main hall. The words that reached my ears shattered my soul in a way I will never forget. Oh, thank God the old lady didn't show up. I was scared to death she'd come after I told her it was better if she didn't. The laughter that followed those words pierced my heart like a frozen lightning bolt. It was Sarah, my Sarah, talking about me as if I were a heavy burden in her most important moment. The voice of Linda, her best friend since high school, responded with complicity. "Oh, girl, you were so smart to discourage her from coming. Imagine how embarrassing it would be to have your mom giving her opinion on everything at your own wedding." I felt as if the air had been sucked out of my lungs. In 68 years of life, I had never experienced pain so deep and cruel. The daughter I raised alone after her father, David, died 12 years ago. The girl I rocked in my arms when she had a fever, whom I comforted through every heartbreak, whom I supported in every major decision. She was celebrating my absence on the most significant day of her existence. I stood motionless in the rain, invisible to the guests rushing inside to take cover from the downpour. The words kept coming at me like precision strikes. Michael the groom commented with a chuckle, "Your mom has always been very intense, right? It's good you convinced her not to come." Sarah laughed again. "Intense is a nice way of saying clingy. She's always wanted to control everything in my life. Today is my day. Finally, I can do things my way without having her breathing down my neck." Every word was a painful revelation about how my own daughter really perceived me. I, who thought I was being a present and loving mother, was seen as controlling and annoying. I, who sacrificed my own dreams to ensure she had all the opportunities I never had, was considered an obstacle to her happiness. The rain kept falling relentlessly, but my tears were hotter than any storm. I remained there standing, getting soaked, listening to how my daughter and her guests celebrated my absence. "Did you guys see how my mom dresses?" Sarah continued. "Always with those old-fashioned dresses and those shawls that smell like mothballs." "I felt so bad that people would see her and think that's how we are," Linda added. "Besides, you know how old ladies are. They always want to be the center of attention. They always have something to criticize. Your wedding isn't the place to put up with mother-in-law drama." Michael, whom I had welcomed into my home for 2 years, as if he were my own son, who had eaten at my table hundreds of times, who had patiently listened to my stories about Sarah when she was little, nodded in agreement. "My mom always says mothers-in-law are like a pebble in your shoe. Small but very annoying. Better to keep them away from important celebrations. Everyone laughed out loud. They all laughed at me. The woman who had worked double shifts at the textile factory for 15 years to pay for Sarah's college tuition. The woman who sold her gold earrings a wedding gift from her own mother to buy the computer she needed for her studies. The woman who woke up at 4 in the morning to make her special breakfasts when she had important exams. The woman who had saved penny by penny for years to be able to contribute financially to this very wedding that was now celebrating my absence. Slowly, I turned around and walked back to my car, leaving the soaked gift on the ground at the entrance. My grandmother's silver set, which I had kept with such love for decades, stayed there abandoned in the rain, just as I had been abandoned by my own blood. But as I drove back home with trembling hands on the wheel and tears blurring my vision, something inside me began to change. A new coldness, a determination I had never felt before, began to grow in my chest. What they didn't know was that Emily Harrison was not the helpless old lady they thought they knew. I arrived at my house completely soaked, but strangely serene. My small brick house in the suburbs, which I had bought with my husband David's life insurance, had never seemed as cozy and safe as it did that night. I took off the navy blue dress I had chosen with such excitement and put on my most comfortable bathrobe. Then I made a cup of chamomile tea with honey, just as my mother had taught me when I was a child, and sat in my wicker rocking chair to process what I had just lived through. Throughout my life, I had defined my worth as a person through my capacity to care for others, first as an obedient daughter, then as a dedicated wife, and finally as a sacrificial mother. David always told me I was the heart of our family, the one who kept everything together with my unconditional love. When he passed away from a massive heart attack 12 years ago, I promised at his grave that I would take care of Sarah until my last breath. I thought I was fulfilling that promise in the best way possible, but tonight I had discovered a brutal truth. My unconditional love had been interpreted as weakness. My dedication had been seen as intrusion. My presence had been felt as a burden. The phone rang 3 times during the night. It was Sarah. I didn't answer. For the first time in my life as a mother, I simply didn't answer my daughter's calls. On the answering machine that Sarah had given me last year to keep me connected to the modern world, her messages piled up. First, she sounded worried. "Mom, why didn't you come to the wedding? I'm worried." "Call me." Then annoyed. "Mom, it's really late and you haven't answered. This isn't like you. Call me now." Finally irritated. "Mom, you're being very dramatic. It's my wedding night and you have me worried. Call me tomorrow when you're over your tantrum." Tantrum. She called my pain over, discovering that my own daughter had conspired to publicly humiliate me. A tantrum, I got up from the rocking chair and went to my bedroom. In the closet, behind my Sunday dresses, I had a shoebox where I kept my most important documents. I opened it carefully and reviewed every paper: house deeds, insurance policies, investment certificates, bank accounts. Everything David had left carefully organized for me before dying. Sarah had no idea what this box contained. She had always assumed I lived solely on my pension as a textile worker, a modest amount that barely covered basic expenses. What she didn't know was that David had been a much more foresighted man than he appeared. During 25 years of marriage, he had silently invested in small properties and savings accounts, always thinking of our future and our daughter's future. When he died, he left me a considerable fortune that I had administered discreetly without showing off, because that's how my mother raised me. Well-earned money doesn't need to be flaunted. I counted the documents. 3 small rental houses across town, a savings account with interest that had grown considerably in 12 years, 2 plots of land upstate that David bought thinking of building a country house for our old age, and several insurance policies maturing at different dates. In total, a fortune that would allow anyone to live comfortably without working for the rest of their life. For years, I kept this information private, because I didn't want Sarah to feel obligated to take care of me out of economic interest. I wanted our relationship to be genuine based on true love, not on inheritance expectations. How ironic this decision turned out to be. By keeping my economic situation a secret, I had allowed my daughter to view me as a financial burden as well as an emotional one. But now things were going to change. The next morning, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't experienced in years. While I quietly ate my scrambled eggs and toast, I made the first real decision of my new life. I was going to see attorney Robert Stone, the lawyer who had handled David's legal affairs. He was a man of integrity with silver hair and real experience who knew perfectly well the economic situation my husband had left me. First, I called to make an appointment. "Mrs. Harrison, what a pleasure to hear from you. How are you? Do you need any special paperwork?" His voice sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. He was the first person in months who seemed glad to talk to me. "Mr. Stone, I need to make some important changes to my will. Could you see me this afternoon?" There was a pause. "Of course, ma'am. Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfectly fine, Robert. For the first time in a long time, everything is very clear." I arrived at his office dressed in my best suit, the navy blue one with gold buttons I had bought for Sarah's college graduation 6 years ago. I had my hair done at the local salon and was wearing the pearl earrings David gave me for our 20th anniversary. I wanted to look like the respectable and decisive woman I really was not, the vulnerable old lady my family thought I was. Attorney Stone received me in his office with his usual courtesy, but I noticed curiosity in his eyes. "Mrs. Harrison, it's great to see you too. How can I help you?" I settled into the chair across from his desk and took a deep breath. "Robert, I want to start a foundation." His eyebrows raised slightly. "What kind of foundation?" "For elderly mothers who have been abandoned or humiliated by their children. I want my assets to be used to help women who have gone through experiences similar to mine." I told him everything. The wedding, the cruel words, the public humiliation, the gift abandoned in the rain. Attorney Stone listened in silence, occasionally shaking his head in disapproval. When I finished my story, he took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm so sorry you went through that experience. No mother deserves to be treated like that, especially a woman like you who has sacrificed so much for her family." We spent 3 hours reviewing documents and structuring the legal changes. Every signature was a step toward my emotional freedom. The Dignified Mothers Foundation would receive 70% of my assets immediately and the remaining 30% after my death. Sarah would only inherit the house where I lived, and only after I was no longer present in this world. Everything else would be dedicated to helping women in my situation. "Are you completely sure about this decision, Mrs. Harrison?" the lawyer asked me before proceeding with the final documents. "Robert, for 68 years, I have made decisions based on what others needed or wanted. This is the first time in my life I am making a decision based solely on what I consider right and fair. I have never been more sure of anything." When I left the lawyer's office that afternoon, I carried in my purse a certified letter addressed to Sarah. In this letter, I calmly explained that I had decided to dedicate my inheritance to a cause I considered more worthy than sustaining ingratitude. There would be no screaming accusations or drama, just a clear and definitive communication about my new life priorities. I also carried something else, a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for the Dignified Mothers Foundation, which would be published in the local newspaper next week. I wanted the whole neighborhood to know exactly what kind of daughter I had raised and what kind of mother I had decided to be from now on. That night, Rose, my neighbor of 30 years, appeared at my door with a casserole dish. "Emily, how was Sarah's wedding? I want to know all the details." Her enthusiasm reminded me how much I had waited for this moment. For months, I had bragged to all the neighbors about my daughter's wedding. I had shown photos of the dress. I had talked about the preparations, How to explain now that there were no details to tell because I discovered my own daughter had discouraged me from attending her wedding. I invented an excuse about not feeling well, but Rose knows me too well. We have been neighbors since Sarah was a little girl. She has seen how I raised my daughter alone, how I worked double shifts, how I sacrificed to give her everything she needed. Emily, something happened. You have a very strange look on your face. Her genuine concern broke me again. I told her everything from the rain to the cruel words I heard at the hall door. Rose was furious. What ingratitude after everything you've done for that girl. But her anger, while comforting, didn't heal the pain I felt. And now what are you going to do? She asked me. I already did what I had to do, Rose. I made decisions I should have made years ago. I showed her the foundation documents. Her eyes widened. Emily, you had all this money. David was very foresighted. He always wanted to secure my future. And does Sarah know? Sarah is going to know very soon. Tomorrow, she receives a certified letter with all the information. Rose whistled softly. Oh, Emily, this is going to be a scandal in the whole neighborhood. Then let it be a scandal, Rose. I'm tired of living my life trying to avoid scandals. Sometimes scandals are necessary for the truth to come to light. That night, for the first time in months, I slept deeply. I didn't wake up worrying about whether Sarah had gotten home safely after the party. I didn't wonder if she had eaten enough or if she needed anything. I didn't plan what to cook to take to her on the weekend. For the first time in years, my mind was completely at peace, focused solely on my own well-being. The next day, very early in the morning, I walked to the post office to personally send the certified letter. Mrs. Sarah Harrison Miller would receive it before noon. Then I returned home. I made my favorite breakfast pancakes and bacon exactly how I liked them, not how she liked them, and I sat in my backyard to water my mint and cilantro plants. While I watered my plants, I reflected on all the years I had spent justifying my daughter's actions, excusing her gradual distancing, interpreting her coldness as the natural independence of a young woman. I had normalized her lack of interest in my life, her way of changing the subject when I told my stories, her impatience when I needed help with something. But the humiliation at the wedding had been the straw that broke the camel's back. There was no longer any way to justify or rationalize what I had heard. The words had come out of her mouth so naturally with such complicity that it was obvious it hadn't been the first time she spoke about me like that. She had probably spent years complaining about her clingy mother with her friends, with her boyfriend, with anyone who would listen. The phone began to ring at 11:30 in the morning. I didn't answer. It kept ringing every 10 minutes for the next 2 hours. I didn't answer. At 2 in the afternoon, I heard the engine of a car parking in front of my house in a hurry. Then I heard rushed footsteps on my gravel driveway, followed by desperate pounding on my door. Mom, open up, I need to talk to you. It was Sarah. Her voice sounded somewhere between panic and rage. She had received the letter. I finished watering my plants, calmly washed my hands, carefully smoothed my hair in front of the hallway mirror, and finally went to open the door. My daughter was standing in my doorway, still wearing yesterday's clothes with deep circles under her eyes and smeared makeup. In her trembling hands was the certified letter she had just opened. Her eyes were red, but I didn't know if it was from crying or from the rage I clearly saw in her expression. Mom, what is this? You can't be serious. I looked her directly in the eye for the first time in years, without feeling the automatic need to soothe her or protect her feelings. I am completely serious, Sarah. I made a very considered decision about how to use my assets. But Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't donate all our money to strangers. Our money. Interesting choice of words for someone who had never shown the slightest interest in my finances. It's not our money, Sarah. It's my money. The money your father left to me and that I have managed alone for 12 years. She was speechless for a moment, processing the reality that her mother had financial autonomy all this time without her knowing. But, Mom, Why? What did I do wrong? And there was the question I had been waiting for. I invited her into the living room. I offered her fresh iced tea. We sat like two polite strangers maintaining physical and emotional distance. The air between us was thick with years of misunderstandings and unexpressed resentments. "Sarah," I began with a calm voice, "yesterday I heard a very revealing conversation." Her face went pale immediately. "What conversation?" "The conversation where you said you were relieved the old lady hadn't shown up to your wedding. The conversation where you called me clingy and said you could finally do things your way without having me breathing down your neck." The silence that followed lasted several eternal minutes. Sarah tried to deny, then minimize, then explain she was nervous and didn't mean it. "Mom, you know I didn't mean that. I was stressed. People say stupid things when they're nervous." Sarah, in 68 years of life, I have learned that people show who they really are when they think no one is listening. "You showed very clearly how you really feel about me." I explained calmly that the Dignified Mothers Foundation was already being structured that 70% of my assets would be donated immediately, and the rest after my death. She would inherit only the house where I lived, and only after I was no longer here. Her attempts to convince me became increasingly desperate. She promised weekly visits, daily calls, inclusion in all major family decisions. It was as if she were reading from a list of obedient daughter obligations she had prepared on the way to my house. "Mom, I can change. We can fix this. Just give me a chance." "Sarah, when you were 10 and got pneumonia, I slept in a chair next to your bed for 5 days. When you cried over your first boyfriend who broke your heart, I canceled my extra shifts at the factory to stay with you. When you needed money for college, I sold my gold earrings without blinking. At no moment did it occur to me that those gestures were dramatic or clingy. They were gestures of unconditional love." My voice remained serene throughout this conversation, which seemed to disturb Sarah more than any screaming would have done. When she got up to leave, she tried one more time. "Mom, please, we can talk about this when you're calmer." I walked with her to the door and said, "Sarah, I have never been calmer in my life. For the first time in years, I know exactly who I am and what I want to do with my remaining time in this world." "But Mom, I'm your only family." I stopped at the threshold and looked her straight in the eye. "No, Sarah. Family doesn't humiliate. Family doesn't conspire to hurt. Family doesn't celebrate absences. You wanted me to disappear from your important life. So that was exactly what I did." I watched her drive away in her car, while I stood in my driveway feeling freer than I had felt in decades. For the first time in my adult life, Emily Harrison was the complete master of her own destiny, and that feeling was sweeter than any forced reconciliation could have been. After Sarah left my house with the certified letter in her hands and her face twisted in shock, I stayed standing in my doorway for several minutes, breathing the fresh afternoon air and feeling a strange mix of relief and melancholy. For the first time in decades, I had made a decision completely for myself, without consulting anyone, without seeking approval, without worrying about hurting anyone else's feelings. It was a sensation so new, it almost scared me. I closed the door slowly and walked to my living room, where I sat in the armchair that had belonged to David, the green velvet one he had chosen when we bought our first furniture as a young couple. From there, I could see the family photos decorating the fireplace mantel, Sarah at her first communion, her high school graduation, getting her degree. In all those photos, I appeared smiling proudly beside her, with the radiant expression of a mother who had managed to get her daughter ahead against all odds. At what exact moment had that smiling girl turned into the woman celebrating my absence? I allowed the memories to flow freely without trying to contain or rationalize them, as I had done for years. I vividly remembered when Sarah was 8 and broke her left wrist falling off the new bicycle I had bought with 6 months of savings. I spent 4 nights without sleep in the public hospital, sleeping in an uncomfortable plastic chair next to her bed, holding her hand when she cried, from pain, singing her the lullabies my own mother had sung to me. The doctors told me I could go home to rest, that she was stable, but I wouldn't move from there. How was I going to leave my little girl alone when she needed me? I remembered when she had her first heartbreak at 17. That boy, Charles, had left her for another classmate after 6 months of dating. Sarah came home crying inconsolably, locked herself in her room, and refused to eat for 2 days. I canceled my extra shifts at the textile factory shifts I desperately needed to pay her tuition, and stayed with her, stroking her hair, bringing her favorite meals, listening for hours to her laments about how unfair love was. I assured her she would find someone who loved her as she deserved, that Charles wasn't worthy of her tears. In all those moments, I was her hero, the person she trusted completely, her safe haven against the cruelties of the world. I also remembered the financial sacrifices I made without her even knowing. When she was 15 and wanted to go on the class trip to Washington, D.C., I sold my engagement ring, a simple band but full of sentimental meaning, to get the money together. I told her I had saved by working overtime. When she needed a computer for her college projects, I sold the gold chain I had inherited from my grandmother. When she wanted to study English at a private academy, because she said she wasn't learning well at public school, I worked cleaning offices on weekends for a whole year to pay the monthly fees. Every sacrifice I made with joy, feeling proud to be able to give her opportunities I never had. I thought I was building not only her future, but also a solid relationship based on love and mutual gratitude. I believed that when she was an adult, she would understand everything I had done for her and thank me. I believed we would be confidants, best friends for life. How naive I was. The sun was setting when Rose knocked on my door again. This time she brought a pot of roast beef that smelled delicious and a worried expression on her wrinkled face. "Emily, I came to see how you're holding up after Sarah's visit. She looked very upset when she left." I invited her in and poured her a large glass of lemonade while she put the roast in my refrigerator. "How did she take the news about the foundation?" she asked with genuine curiosity. Rose had been a silent witness to my life for 3 decades. She had seen how I raised Sarah alone after David's death. She had heard my worries about money, my sleepless nights when my daughter got sick, my celebrations when she had academic successes. If anyone could understand my decision, it was her. She got furious, Rose. She didn't understand how I could donate our money to strangers, as she put it. Rose frowned. Our money. Since when is the money your husband left you hers too? Exactly what I thought. All these years she's been married. She never asked about my financial situation, never offered to help me with anything, never showed interest in how I managed to live. But now that she knows there's money involved, suddenly it becomes our money. We sat in silence for a moment, drinking lemonade and listening to the sounds of dusk in the neighborhood. Children playing in the street, ice cream trucks playing their music, mothers calling their children for dinner. Sounds that had been the soundtrack of my life for decades, but now I heard them with different ears. "You know what hurts me the most, Rose?" I asked finally. "It's not the ingratitude, although that hurts a lot. It's not even the public humiliation at her wedding. What hurts me most is realizing that I spent years misinterpreting our relationship. I thought we were close, that my opinion mattered to her, that she enjoyed spending time with me. But now I understand that all this time she was tolerating me putting up with my presence because she felt obligated." Rose shook her head sadly. "Oh, Emily, children these days are very different from before. Before you respected your parents even if you didn't agree with them. Now they think they can treat us like burdens." "But it's not just a lack of respect, Rose. It's that she really sees me as a burden." When she was talking to her friends at the wedding, her relief was genuine. She wasn't pretending to look cool. She was genuinely happy I hadn't shown up. This realization hurt me more than any scream or direct insult. At least open cruelty is honest. But discovering that for years I had been living in an illusion of mutual affection was devastating. That night after Rose left, I dedicated myself to checking every corner of my house with new eyes. Every object told me a different story now that I knew the truth about my daughter's feelings toward me. The frame with her college graduation photo no longer filled me with maternal pride, but reminded me of all the times I asked about her major, and she answered me with monosyllables as if my questions were a nuisance. The embroidered tablecloth I had made for her first apartment no longer seemed like a beautiful gift, but a symbol of my need to be present in her life in ways she clearly didn't desire. The empty Tupperware stacked in my kitchen containers where I had sent her homemade food for years now seemed like evidence of my refusal to accept that she no longer wanted me to take care of her, like when she was a child. I sat in my bedroom in front of the vanity where I kept my jewelry box and opened the secret drawer where I had the few jewels I hadn't sold to finance Sarah's dreams. A pair of pearl earrings, a silver bracelet, a gold brooch in the shape of a butterfly that had belonged to my mother, small pieces but full of family history. For years, I had reserved them thinking that someday I would give them to Sarah as an emotional inheritance objects that would connect the women of our family through the generations. Now I wondered if she would see them as family treasures or simply as old things she would have to get rid of when I died. The phone rang at 10 at night. It was Sarah again. This time I did answer, but not with the usual maternal anxiety. I answered with the calm of someone who had already made all the important decisions. "Mom, we need to talk more calmly. Michael and I want to come over tomorrow to sit down with you and resolve this as a family." "Michael wants to come?" I asked with genuine curiosity. "Since when does Michael get involved in my financial affairs?" "Well, he's my husband, Mom. What affects me affects him too." "I understand. And when you two made the decision to discourage me from going to the wedding, did you also consult with him?" Silence. "Sarah, you told me you were relieved the old lady hadn't shown up. Did you also consult that opinion with your husband?" "Mom, please don't be like that. You're taking things out of context." "Out of context, Sarah, you were at your own wedding surrounded by your loved ones on one of the happiest days of your life. In that context, you expressed relief at my absence. There is no clearer context than that." Another long silence. "Look, we're coming tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon. Please think about it tonight. This doesn't have to be definitive." She hung up without waiting for my response. I couldn't sleep that night, but not from anxiety or sadness as I had expected. My mind was strangely active, processing decades of small details that now took on a completely different meaning. I remembered all the times Sarah had changed the subject when I started telling stories of my youth or her childhood. I remembered her impatience when I asked for help with technology, as if teaching her mother to use the ATM was a heavy burden. I remembered how she avoided taking me to social events at her work or her circle of friends, always with excuses about the type of people going or the environment not being appropriate for me. But I also remembered good things, genuine moments of connection that couldn't have been completely faked. The times she arrived by surprise with my favorite dessert, the spontaneous calls to ask how I was, the long hugs when she left after visiting me. Had those moments also been acting? Or did two Sarahs exist? One who genuinely loved me, but was ashamed of that love, and another who saw me as an obstacle to the life she wanted to live. At 5 in the morning, I got up and made coffee with cinnamon, just as my mother had taught me. I sat on my back porch to watch the sunrise and think about all the women in my family who had come before me. My great-grandmother who raised 8 children alone after my great-grandfather died in the war. My grandmother, whom I had named my daughter after, who worked washing other people's clothes to send her children to school. My mother, who sewed until late hours to buy us new shoes for school. All of them had been strong women who had prioritized their families over themselves, but they had also been women who kept their dignity intact. None of them would have tolerated the lack of respect I had been normalizing for years. While I drank my coffee and watched the city slowly wake up, I had an important revelation. The problem hadn't been just Sarah's attitude toward me. The problem had also been my attitude toward myself. For years, I had accepted crumbs of affection as if they were full banquets. I had interpreted tolerance as love obligation, as genuine affection, physical presence, as emotional presence. I had been so afraid of losing my only daughter that I had allowed our relationship to deteriorate until it became something one-sided and dysfunctional. At 9 in the morning, before the scheduled visitors arrived, I went to the local market to buy ingredients to make beef bourguignon. It was a laborious dish that I normally prepared only for very special occasions, but I had my reasons for making it today. I wanted to keep my hands busy while I processed my emotions, and I also wanted to have something delicious waiting for me after the difficult conversation I knew awaited me. At the market, Mrs. Carmen, the lady who sold the freshest produce, greeted me with curiosity. "Emily, how was Sarah's wedding? I didn't see you at church yesterday." In my neighborhood, news travels fast, and the absence of the bride's mother at Sunday Mass following the wedding had definitely been noticed. "Mrs. Carmen, the wedding was revealing," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Sometimes you discover things about the people you love that you would prefer not to have known." She nodded wisely. "Oh, honey, that happens a lot with children when they get married. They forget who raised them." "Exactly, Mrs. Carmen, but one also has to know when to stop reminding them." I bought the freshest ingredients I could find: top-quality beef, pearl onions, mushrooms, fresh herbs. As I walked back home with my market bags, I felt like a woman preparing for battle. Not a battle to win my daughter's love, that war I had already lost, but a battle to keep my own dignity intact. Back in my kitchen, I began the laborious process of preparing the beef bourguignon, searing the meat, chopping the vegetables, simmering the sauce with red wine. Every step required patience and precision, exactly what my mind needed. While I cooked, I reflected on the irony of the situation. For years, I had cooked Sarah's favorite dishes. I had adapted my recipes to her tastes. I had learned to make the food she liked even if I wasn't that excited about it. Today, I was cooking solely for myself, preparing the dish I liked most without considering anyone else's preferences at all. It was a strangely liberating feeling. At 2:30 in the afternoon, an hour before the scheduled visit, the doorbell rang. It was Sarah, but this time she came accompanied not only by Michael, but also by an older woman I didn't recognize immediately. When I opened the door, my daughter introduced me to the stranger with a forced smile. "Mom, this is Mrs. Roberts, Michael's mom. We thought it would be good for her to be present in this conversation." Ah, they had brought reinforcements. Sarah had decided she needed the presence of another maternal figure to convince me to change my mind. It was a cunning strategy, I must admit. They probably thought I would feel pressured to behave in a more maternal and understanding way in the presence of my daughter's mother-in-law. But what they didn't know was that I was no longer interested in being the perfect mother who always says yes to everything. I invited them in politely and offered them fresh iced tea. The kitchen smelled deliciously of rich beef stew, and I noticed how Michael inhaled the aroma with appreciation. "Smells great, Mrs. Harrison. Are you making beef bourguignon?" "Yes, Michael. It's my favorite dish, even though it's a lot of work." We sat in my living room. I immediately noticed the dynamic that had been established. Sarah looked nervous. Michael seemed uncomfortable, and Mrs. Roberts had the expression of someone who had come with a specific mission. It was clear the three of them had planned this conversation in advance. "Mrs. Harrison," began my daughter's mother-in-law with a soft but firm voice, meant to be persuasive. "Sarah has told me about the situation with her inheritance, and I wanted to come talk to you mother to mother." "Of course, Mrs. Roberts. What would you like to tell me?" "Well, as a mother, I understand that sometimes our children hurt us without realizing it. Young people these days speak without thinking. They say things they don't really feel, but that doesn't mean we should punish them so severely." Interesting. So Sarah had told her version of events, probably minimizing her cruel words and presenting herself as the victim of a dramatic and irrational mother. "Did Sarah tell you exactly what I heard at her wedding?" I asked with genuine curiosity. "She told me there was a misunderstanding, that you misinterpreted some things she said when she was nervous." I looked directly at Sarah. A misunderstanding. Misinterpretation. My daughter couldn't hold my gaze. "Mom, I already explained I was stressed." "Sarah," I interrupted her with a calm voice. "Look Mrs. Roberts in the eye and repeat to her exactly the words you said about me at your wedding. Word for word." The silence that followed was deafening. "Go on, daughter. If they were just words said out of stress, if they were misunderstandings or misinterpretations, you shouldn't be ashamed to repeat them." Sarah turned red as a beet. Michael intervened. "Mrs. Harrison, I think the point is that we can all get past this. Families forgive, right?" "Michael," I responded calmly, "were you present when your wife expressed relief because I hadn't shown up to her wedding?" "Well, Yes or no?" "Yes, I was present." "And did it seem appropriate to you?" Michael looked at Sarah, seeking help, but she still couldn't look up. "It was a difficult moment," he muttered finally. "Difficult for whom, Michael? For you, who were celebrating my absence, or for me, who was being publicly humiliated without knowing it?" Mrs. Roberts cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Harrison, I understand you feel hurt, but don't you think this reaction is a bit extreme? Donating all your assets over some words, said in a moment of stress." There was the key point. To the rest of the world, my reaction seemed disproportionate. A normal mother would have cried, complained, demanded an apology, but eventually forgiven. A normal mother wouldn't have completely reorganized her financial life in response to a public humiliation, but I no longer wanted to be a normal mother. "Mrs. Roberts," I replied with the most serene voice I could manage, "let me ask you a question. If you discovered that your son has been talking about you as a burden for years, that he has been faking affection out of obligation, that he celebrates when you are not present in the important moments of his life, what would you do?" She had no answer for that. Because that is what I discovered. It wasn't isolated words said out of stress. It was the revelation of how my daughter really perceives me after 68 years of unconditional love on my part. I got up slowly and walked toward the kitchen. "The stew is ready. Would you like to try a little before continuing this conversation?" The four of us went to the kitchen where I served the dish I had prepared with so much love for myself. As we ate in uncomfortable silence, I reflected on the surreal nature of the situation. There I was serving delicious food to the people who had come to convince me to give away my financial autonomy for the sake of keeping the family peace. It was, I thought, as I slowly chewed my perfect beef, the last act of maternal service I would perform out of obligation. From now on, all my generosity would be voluntary and earned. After we finished eating the stew, in a silence that thickened with every minute we returned to the living room where the tension could be cut with a knife, Mrs. Roberts, my daughter's mother-in-law, cleared her throat, preparing for what had clearly been planned as the final argument that would make me change my mind. "Mrs. Harrison," she began with a maternal voice, "I've been reflecting on what you told me. As a mother, I understand your pain perfectly, but think about it carefully. Is it really worth destroying a family over words said without thinking?" Her eyes looked at me with the typical condescension of someone who thinks they are talking to a person who has lost their mind. "Destroying a family?" I repeated slowly, savoring the irony of those words. "Who destroyed exactly what, Mrs. Roberts?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Michael stared at the floor as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. It was obvious they had expected that the presence of an external maternal figure would make me more docile, more willing to yield for the sake of family harmony. "Well," continued Mrs. Roberts, "you are punishing Sarah for a moment of weakness. Young people sometimes say cruel things when they are under pressure, but that doesn't mean they don't love you." I got up slowly and walked to the mantel where I kept my family photos. I took a photo of Sarah at her college graduation and held it in my hands, observing that radiant smile that had thrilled me so much 6 years ago. "Mrs. Roberts, do you believe true love is expressed by celebrating the absence of the loved one? No, but Do you believe true love is expressed by feeling relief when that person doesn't show up at the most important moments? Mrs. Harrison, you are taking things too personally. Do you believe true love is expressed by calling your mother clingy and controlling in front of strangers? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the street noise seemed to have stopped. I placed the photograph back in its place and turned directly to Sarah, who continued avoiding my gaze. Daughter, look me in the eyes. Reluctantly, she looked up. For 28 years, I have loved you unconditionally. Is that true? Yes, Mom. For 28 years, I have sacrificed my own desires to ensure you had everything you needed. Is that true? Yes. For 28 years, I have been available whenever you needed me, regardless of the time, regardless of my own plans. Is that true? Her voice broke slightly. Yes, Mom. Then explain to me, Sarah, at what exact moment did I become the type of mother one has to feel relieved about when she doesn't show up? Tears began to roll down her cheeks, but I kept my voice serene and my eyes firm on hers. I'm going to tell you when, daughter. I became that type of mother when you decided that my unconditional love was something you could take for granted. When you started seeing my gestures of affection as obligations I had toward you, instead of gifts I gave you voluntarily. Michael finally spoke. Mrs. Harrison, Sarah is sorry. Isn't that enough? I turned toward him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Michael, would you say my daughter seems sorry for hurting me or sorry for having been caught? He opened his mouth to answer, but no sound came out because there is a very big difference between those two things. Mrs. Roberts made a last attempt at mediation. Look, Mrs. Harrison, all parents go through difficult times with our children. It's part of life. But at the end of the day, family is the most important thing we have. You're right, I answered calmly. Family is the most important thing we have. That's why it's so important not to allow them to disrespect us. But you are being very extreme. Extreme? I interrupted her softly. Mrs. Roberts, allow me to tell you what is extreme. Extreme is working double shifts for 15 years to pay for your daughter's college. Extreme is selling your own mother's jewelry to buy a computer. Extreme is canceling extra shifts desperately needed to take care of your daughter when she had a broken heart. That is extreme. I walked to the window and looked at the street where I had lived for 30 years. Deciding how to use my own money in my last years of life is not extreme. It's simple self-determination. Sarah finally found her voice. Mom, please, I promise things are going to change. I'm going to be a better daughter. I turned toward her slowly. A better daughter, Sarah, do you know what the problem is with that promise? She shook her head, crying silently. The problem is that you shouldn't have to promise me to be a good daughter at 28 years old. That is something that should arise naturally from 28 years of received love. The fact that you have to promise it to me now means that for years you haven't been, and that only now that there is money involved are you interested in changing. The words came out of my mouth with a clarity that surprised even me. For decades, I had avoided confrontations, softened my opinions, minimized my feelings to keep the peace. But something fundamental had changed in me. I was no longer afraid to speak uncomfortable truths. Besides, I continued, I don't want a daughter who treats me well out of obligation or interest. I want a daughter who treats me well because I genuinely matter to her, and that daughter, unfortunately, is not you. Michael stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Sarah, let's go. Your mom clearly isn't being rational. But Sarah didn't move. She stayed seated, crying in silence, probably processing for the first time in her adult life the real consequences of her actions. No, Michael, I said calmly. Sarah can stay if she wants, but you and Mrs. Roberts can go. This conversation is between my daughter and me. Mrs. Roberts looked clearly offended. Mrs. Harrison, I came here with the best intentions, and I appreciate your hospitality. But the best intentions don't change the facts. The facts are that your daughter-in-law has been disrespecting me for years, and that you came here hoping to convince me to ignore that for the sake of keeping up family appearances." Michael took his mother by the arm. "Let's go, Mom. Sarah will wait for you in the car." When they left, the house was left in a strange silence. It was just Sarah and me, mother and daughter, finally facing the naked truth of our relationship after years of avoiding uncomfortable conversations. "Why Sarah?" I asked her when we were alone. "Why did you come to see me as a burden?" She wiped her tears with her sleeve and took a deep breath before answering. "I don't know, Mom. I think I got so used to you always being there that I stopped appreciating everything you did for me." "When did you start feeling this way?" "Honestly, I think when I met Michael. He came from a family where the parents were more distant, where they didn't get involved so much in the lives of adult children. And I started thinking that maybe that was the normal way, that maybe you were too present." It was the first time she had given me an honest answer in years. And it never occurred to you to talk to me about that, to ask me for a little more space respectfully. "I was afraid of hurting you, but I also liked the comfort of having you always available. It was easier to complain about you to other people than to confront the situation directly." Her honesty was painful but necessary. "Sarah, do you understand that when you decided it was better that I didn't go to your wedding, you made the cruelest decision a daughter can make with her mother?" "Yes, I understand now." "Do you understand that for months, you had me helping you with preparations, making me believe my presence was desired, when in reality you were planning to exclude me?" "Yes." "Do you understand that wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness, but a planned betrayal?" The silence stretched for several minutes. Finally, Sarah looked up and looked me directly in the eye for the first time in the conversation. "Mom, is there anything I can do to fix this?" Her question took me by surprise, not because I didn't expect it, but because I knew my answer was going to hurt her deeply. "No, Sarah, there is nothing you can do to fix this." "Nothing?" "Nothing, because the damage isn't in what you did at your wedding. The damage is in discovering how you really see me after so many years of believing we had a close and loving relationship." I sat in the armchair opposite her, maintaining a physical distance that reflected the emotional distance that now existed between us. "Daughter, if tomorrow you started treating me wonderfully, if you called me every day, if you invited me to all your celebrations, if you showered me with attention, I would know you're doing it because you regret losing an inheritance, not because I genuinely matter to you, and that would be even more painful than indifference. But Mom, I do love you." "Sarah, there are different types of love. There is the love you feel for someone because they are useful to you, and there is the love you feel for someone because that person enriches your life simply by existing. For years, I thought you loved me in the second way, but now I know you loved me in the first." She stayed processing my words in silence. "And do you know what is the saddest part of all this?" I continued. "That I myself contributed to this situation. I taught you that my love was unconditional, without teaching you that my respect for you depended on how you treated me. I gave you so much without expecting anything in return that you never learned to value what you received." The sun was beginning to set, filling my living room with a golden light that made everything look unreal. Sarah and I had been talking for hours, but for the first time in years, we had been really communicating instead of simply exchanging polite words. "Mom, what's going to happen now?" she asked me with a small voice. "Now you are going to live your life, and I am going to live mine. Does that mean we are never going to have a relationship again? It means we are going to have the relationship you choose. If you decide you want to really know the woman I am beyond just seeing me as your provider mother, maybe we can build something new. But it's going to have to be something completely different from what we've had until now. And the foundation, is it definitive? Completely definitive. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to sign the last documents. By Friday, the Dignified Mothers Foundation will be officially established and operating. Sarah nodded slowly, finally accepting that her mother wasn't the malleable woman she had known for 28 years. "Can I ask you something, Mom?" "Of course. Are you happy with this decision?" The question caught me off guard because no one had asked me about my happiness in decades. It had always been about what others needed, wanted, or expected from me. "You know what, Sarah, yes. For the first time in many years, I am completely happy with the decision I have made. I feel at peace with myself, even if that means losing you." "Mom, I lost you a long time ago. I just hadn't realized it until now." Those words hurt us both, but they were the purest truth that had come out of my mouth in years. Sarah got up slowly, like a woman who had aged 10 years in one afternoon. "I guess I'm leaving." "I guess so." At the door, she turned one last time. "Mom, is there any possibility that one day you can forgive me?" "I already forgave you, Sarah, but forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it definitely doesn't mean going back to how things were before." "What does it mean then?" "It means I don't hold a grudge. It means I wish you happiness in your marriage and in your life. But it also means I'm no longer going to allow disrespect, and I'm no longer going to pretend cruel words don't matter when they come from the people we love." After she left, I stood in my doorway for several minutes, breathing the fresh afternoon air and feeling something I hadn't felt in years, the deep satisfaction of having defended my own dignity. That night, for the first time since the wedding, I slept deeply. I didn't wake up worrying about Sarah. I didn't wonder if she got home okay. I didn't plan what to cook to take her on the weekend. My mind was completely at peace, focused solely on my own plans for the future. The next day, very early in the morning, I dressed in my best suit, the navy blue one with gold buttons that made me feel powerful, and headed to Attorney Stone's office to sign the final documents for the foundation. The lawyer received me with a smile of approval. "Mrs. Harrison, how does it feel the day before officially changing your life?" "I feel free, Robert, truly free." We spent an hour reviewing the final details. The foundation, Dignified Mothers, would be headquartered in a small but dignified office downtown. I would be the founding president with a modest salary that would allow me to live comfortably while dedicating myself to helping other women in similar situations. The rest of the money would be used to provide legal, psychological, and financial support to mothers who had been abandoned or mistreated by their families. "Have you thought about how you're going to advertise the foundation's services?" the lawyer asked me. "I've thought about giving an interview to the local paper. I think it's important that women in the community know they aren't alone if they are going through similar experiences." "Aren't you worried about negative publicity? Your story is going to be very well known in the neighborhood." "Robert, for 68 years, I have lived my life trying to prevent people from talking about me. And do you know what I discovered? They talk anyway. The difference is that now they are going to talk about a woman who defended herself instead of talking about a woman who endured abuse in silence." When we finished signing all the papers, the lawyer shook my hand with genuine respect. "Mrs. Harrison, I have worked with many people in moments of transition in their lives, but rarely have I seen someone take such brave and well-thought-out decisions as yours." "Thank you, Robert. Although I must confess I don't feel brave. I just feel tired of living the life others expected me to live." Back home, I stopped at the market to buy fresh ingredients to make myself a delicious meal. This time, I bought only what I liked: green mole with chicken handmade tortillas, tamarind water, and caramel flan for dessert. I didn't have to consider anyone else's tastes. I didn't have to calculate portions for uninvited guests. I didn't have to wonder if anyone else craved something different. It was the first meal I bought thinking solely of my own pleasure, and I felt strangely giddy, like a little girl who just discovered she can eat candy for breakfast. In my kitchen, while I prepared my favorite food, I reflected on all the changes that had occurred in my life in less than a week. I had gone from being a dedicated but invisible mother to being an independent woman with a clear purpose. I had gone from living for others to living for myself. I had gone from fearing loneliness to celebrating autonomy, and most importantly, I had gone from being a victim of circumstances to being the architect of my own destiny. The phone rang while I was eating my green mole. It was Sarah. This time I answered, but not with the maternal anxiety of before. "Hello, Sarah." "Mom, I saw in the paper the announcement about the foundation. Is it official?" "Completely official. Tomorrow I have my first appointment with a lady who wants to tell me her story." There was a long silence. "Mom." "Yes." "Are you ever going to be able to be proud of me again?" Her question touched my heart, but it didn't change my resolve. "Sarah, I am always going to be proud of your achievements. You have an excellent education, a stable job, a marriage. Those are things any mother can be proud of. But proud of me as a person? That, daughter, is a question only you can answer. I cannot be proud of someone who doesn't respect herself enough to respect others. When you learn to treat yourself with dignity, you will probably also learn to treat others with dignity." I don't understand. Sarah, a woman who respects herself, doesn't celebrate the humiliation of her own mother because she understands that if she allows that, she is teaching the world that older women don't deserve respect, and someday she will also be an older woman. After hanging up, I finished my meal in perfect peace, savoring every bite as if it were the first of my new life, because in many ways it was. 3 weeks after signing the documents for the Dignified Mothers Foundation, my life had taken a completely different course. Every morning I woke up with a clear purpose to help women who had gone through experiences similar to mine. The small office downtown had become my second home, a place where the tears of betrayed mothers transformed into action plans and renewed hope. My first beneficiary had been Mrs. Carmen, a 72-year-old lady whose 3 children had decided it was time to sell her house for her own good to put her in a nursing home. With the help of our lawyer, we managed to stop the sale and establish a trust that guaranteed her living in her home until her natural death. The look of relief on her face when we signed the documents reminded me why I had made the right decision. It was Friday afternoon when I heard my doorbell ring insistently. Upon opening the door, I found Michael standing in my entrance, but this time he came alone without Sarah or his mother. He looked exhausted with deep circles under his eyes and an expression of defeat that surprised me. "Mrs. Harrison, can I talk to you?" I invited him in and offered him iced tea. We sat in my living room where barely 3 weeks before the confrontation that changed my life forever had taken place. "How is Sarah?" I asked him, not out of maternal anxiety, but out of basic courtesy. "That is precisely the problem," answered Michael, running his hands through his hair nervously. "Mrs. Harrison Sarah is not well. Since you established the foundation, she has been different." "Different how?" "She's obsessed with what happened. She reads the newspaper article about the foundation every day. She has been researching other similar organizations. She doesn't sleep well, barely eats, and is constantly talking about you." I stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. "Yesterday, she confessed something to me that left me frozen." Michael took a deep breath before continuing. "She told me that for years she had been ashamed of you, but that now she realizes she should have been ashamed of herself." His words touched my heart, but I kept my expression neutral. "She told me about all the times you sold your things to give her opportunities. She told me about the extra jobs, about the sleepless nights when she was sick, about everything you sacrificed to raise her alone. And she told me that for years she interpreted all that as pressure and control, when in reality it was pure love." Michael stopped and looked me directly in the eye. "Mrs. Harrison, my wife is shattered, not because of the money, but because of having lost the only person who loved her unconditionally throughout her entire life." "Michael," I replied calmly. "I appreciate you coming to tell me this, but what do you expect me to do with that information?" "I don't know. Maybe talk to her, give her a chance to really apologize." "And what do you think about all this?" Michael looked down, clearly uncomfortable. Honestly, Mrs. Harrison, at first I thought you were exaggerating. But after living with Sarah these 3 weeks, seeing how broken she is, I started to understand that maybe we were the ones who didn't understand the gravity of what had happened. Yes, I also participated in that conversation at the wedding. I also expressed relief at your absence, and now I realize that was very wrong. It was the first time Michael assumed responsibility for his part in the humiliation. That pleasantly surprised me. Michael, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer me with total honesty. Of course. If I hadn't had money, if I were really the poor old lady you guys thought I was, would you be here asking me to forgive your wife? The silence that followed was eloquent. Exactly, I continued. Sarah's repentance arrived exactly at the same time as the discovery of my economic situation. That is not a coincidence, Michael. That is opportunism disguised as remorse. But Mrs. Harrison, don't you think people can genuinely change? Of course they can change. But genuine change takes time and is demonstrated with actions, not with desperate words when economic benefits are lost. Michael stayed with me for another hour telling me about the changes he had observed in Sarah. According to him, my daughter had started calling other mothers her age to ask them about their relationships with their own mothers. She had started reading books on family relationships. She'd even gone to church to talk to Father Alexander about forgiveness and reconciliation. You know what I find interesting about all that, Michael, I said when he finished his story, that Sarah is doing all that introspection and personal growth work, but she hasn't contacted me directly a single time. It's just that she's afraid you'll reject her. And hasn't it occurred to her that maybe the first step for a genuine reconciliation would be facing that fear and risking rejection? Michael had no answer for that. Michael, for 28 years, I was the one who always took the first step, the one who always sought dialogue, the one who always extended a hand. If Sarah really wants a different relationship with me, she is going to have to learn to take the first step herself, too. When Michael left, I stayed reflecting on the conversation. On one hand, I was glad to know that Sarah was finally understanding the magnitude of her actions. On the other hand, I worried that her apparent growth was motivated by financial loss rather than a genuine awakening of conscience. That night, while I prepared my dinner quietly, my phone rang. It was Rose, excited with news from the neighborhood. Emily, did you hear? The story of your foundation came out in the national newspaper. You're famous. Indeed, a journalist from the city had read the local article about dignified mothers and decided to do a broader report on the phenomenon of elderly mothers who were mistreated by their families. My story had become the main example of the article. And you know what else? Continued Rose, excited. 5 more women have already arrived asking for help from the foundation. They come from other states. That information filled me with deep satisfaction. My personal pain had transformed into something useful for other women. My humiliation had turned into empowerment for mothers in similar situations. 2 days later, Sunday morning, while I ate breakfast quietly on my back porch, I heard someone knock softly on my door. It wasn't the desperate knock of previous weeks, but something more timid, humbler. It was Sarah. She came alone, dressed simply without makeup, with red but determined eyes. "Mom," she said when I opened the door, "I didn't come to ask you to change the foundation. I didn't come to ask for money. I didn't come to ask you to return things to how they were before. I only come to ask for forgiveness without expecting anything in return." I invited her in. I offered her coffee, and we sat in my kitchen where we had shared thousands of conversations during her childhood and adolescence. "I've been reading about the foundation," she told me, "about the women you are helping, and I realized that you turned my cruelty into something beautiful for other people. And how does that make you feel? Proud and ashamed at the same time. Proud because my mom is an extraordinary woman who transforms pain into purpose. Ashamed because it was me who caused that pain." Her words sounded different this time, less desperate, more reflective. "Sarah, what do you expect from this conversation?" Nothing, Mom. Absolutely nothing. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand who you really are, and that I deeply regret having taken 28 years to realize it. And if I told you I can't forgive you, I would understand perfectly, and I would keep working on being a better person, not to regain your love, but because I realized that is what I must do. For the first time in years, I saw my daughter as the mature woman she should have been long ago. Sarah, I finally said, I already forgave you weeks ago, but forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to being as they were before. I know, Mom. What does a new relationship with me mean to you? It means really knowing you as the woman you are, not just as my care provider. It means respecting you as the extraordinary person you are. It means valuing your time and your company as the gifts they always were. We finished our coffee in a silence more comfortable than any conversation we had had in years. When she got up to leave, she said, Mom, I know this process is going to take time, but I want you to know I am going to work to deserve you as a mother instead of taking for granted that I deserve you simply for being your daughter. After she left, I stayed sitting in my kitchen, reflecting on the extraordinary changes that had occurred in our lives in less than a month. I had lost a daughter who took me for granted, but maybe with time and work I could gain a daughter who genuinely valued me. It was a small beginning, but it was a beginning. 6 months later, my new routine had become an unexpected source of deep peace. Every morning I wake up at 6, not because someone needs me urgently, but because I genuinely enjoy the first hours of the day when the world is silent and full of possibilities. I make my cinnamon coffee exactly how I like it, strong and aromatic without calculating how many cups others need or what kind of sweetener they prefer. I dedicate 2 hours a day to tending my garden, planting flowers I choose simply because they bring me joy. Red carnations, white roses, mint that fills the morning air with its freshness. The plants respond to my care without criticism, without ingratitude, without taking my attention for granted. There is a beautiful honesty in the way a flower blooms when you water it with love, a lesson that took me 68 years to learn completely. 4 days a week, I work at the Office of Dignified Mothers. Seeing other women rebuilding their lives after family abandonment constantly reminds me that my experience, although painful, was not unique. There is a silent sisterhood of mothers who discovered that unconditional love is not always reciprocated with basic respect. Mrs. Carmen now helps as a volunteer, telling her story to newly arrived women. Her strength inspires me every day. The foundation has grown beyond my most optimistic expectations. We receive cases from all over the country, women whose children have scammed them, mothers who have been kicked out of their own homes, grandmothers who have been separated from their grandchildren by family conflicts. Every story confirms to me that I made the right decision by transforming my personal pain into meaningful social action. Sarah has tried gradual approaches during these months, not the desperate visits of the first weeks, but more mature and reflective approaches. She calls me every Sunday afternoon, short conversations where she tells me about her work, her thoughts, small events of her daily life. She doesn't ask me for dramatic advice or seek my approval for major decisions. She simply shares as an adult friend would with another. Last month, she invited me to lunch at a quiet restaurant downtown. She arrived on time, dressed simply with flowers from the market red carnations, my favorites, which she had remembered after so many years. During 2 hours, we talked about books, about changes in the neighborhood, about national news. She spoke little about herself and much about things that genuinely seemed to interest her about my current life. When we said goodbye, she said, "Mom, I know this process is going to take years, not months, but I want you to know I am learning to know the extraordinary woman you always were beyond just seeing you as my provider mother." Her words sounded different, less rehearsed, more authentic. I haven't made definitive decisions about our future. Some wounds need time to heal completely, and some relationships need to be rebuilt from completely new foundations. But for the first time in years, I feel that maybe, just Maybe we could build something genuine between us. Yesterday, while reviewing old photographs I had kept in a box for decades, I found a letter David wrote me shortly before his death. I had completely forgotten it, hidden among important papers. "Emily," said the letter, "if one day you feel invisible or undervalued, remember that your kindness is a gift that not all people deserve to receive. Don't be afraid to keep it for those who really appreciate it." I held the letter against my chest and smiled, remembering my husband's silent wisdom. He had understood even before I did myself that self-love sometimes requires establishing firm boundaries with the people we love most. Some memories are treasures we must protect from the ingratitude of the present. Some relationships deserve second chances, but only under completely new terms. And some decisions, however painful they are, initially free us to become the women we were always destined to be. This morning, Rose came to visit me with exciting news. Her own daughter, inspired by my story, had started calling her more frequently and including her in important family plans. "Your courage inspired my Elena to reflect on how she treated me," she told me with tears of gratitude. "I never thought your pain could become a blessing for other families." Her words confirmed something I had suspected for months. My decision to defend myself had created ripples that touched lives I didn't even know. How many women had read my story in the paper and decided they too deserved respect? How many daughters had reflected on their own relationships with their mothers after seeing the consequences of taking filial love for granted? At sunset, I sit in my backyard with a cup of chamomile tea, observing the flowers I planted with my own hands, listening to the tranquil sounds of a neighborhood that now sees me as the woman who stood up for herself, not as the victim who endured in silence. The air smells of jasmine and new possibilities. My heart is at peace with the decisions I made. My mind is clear about the path I chose. My soul is satisfied with the woman I became. Some people will say I was too harsh, that families should forgive and forget, regardless of the circumstances. But I learned that forgiving doesn't mean tolerating, and that loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to disrespect you. Sometimes the greatest new beginning is the silence one chooses to maintain until other people learn to value your voice. Sometimes the greatest lesson of love you can teach is showing that your love has limits and that your dignity is not for sale. Sometimes the most maternal decision you can make is teaching your adult daughter that actions have consequences, even when they come from the heart of someone who loves them unconditionally. And sometimes the only way to recover your own life is risking losing the life others expected you to live for them. We are curious to know how far this story reached. Where are you watching this from? Comment below.